Hello, everybody. After 4 years of making videos about this 2024 presidential race, it is now time to make a final prediction 2 days before Election Day, which, of course, is this Tuesday, November 5th. So, as you all know, just yesterday, I'm sure you've heard about it by now, the Des Moines Register, or sponsored by the Des Moines Register, but conducted by Ann Selzer and Company, conducted a poll in the state of Iowa. Now, this is the top pollster in the nation. They get it spot on almost every single time. This is simply the best of the best, the gold standard of polling. And they shocked everybody and absolutely changed everyone's predictions in this race. As a broad statement about what we're going to see in my prediction, I don't think that this race will be close. I think that Kamala Harris will win the presidency and that it will be by a very substantial margin. I mean, just look at these facts. Again, this is Ann Selzer's poll in Iowa. Iowa, a state that Donald Trump won by 8.2%. I thought it was 8.5, but 8.2% in the last election is now going to Kamala Harris in this gold standard poll by 3 points. That is an 11-point shift towards the Democratic Party. Absolutely unbelievable. This was a huge shock. And just look at Ann Selzer's track record. I mean, their biggest miss ever was in a 2018 governor's race, where they were off by 5 points. But just look at every presidential race since 2020. Since 2012. In 2020, they said Trump would win by 7 when every other poll said that it was about tied. He ended up winning by 8. In 2016, they said he would win by 7. He won by 9. In 2012, they said Obama would win by 5. He won by 6. They get it spot on every single time, like no other pollster out there. If you're going to trust a poll, it's going to be this one. And to see this pollster in particular have such a shocking margin, shocking overperformance for Kamala Harris compared to any other poll we see, it's a very strong sign for the Kamala Harris campaign just 2 days away from Election Day now. So, with that being said, let's get into this prediction. That really did change everything. So, starting with our safe Democratic states, I mean, I think that the country will vote to the left of 2020. I really do. I mean, again, Ann Selzer's final poll in 2020, Republican plus 7. Trump would win Iowa by 7. Their final poll in 2024, Harris wins by 3. This margin would have to be off by so much for Donald Trump to not lose the election, right? For Donald Trump to win the election, he would have to win Iowa by 8 points, right? Just about 8. If he lost it by 8 points in 2020, I'm sorry, 10 points I meant. I don't know why I said 8. If he lost it by 8 points in 2020, then he'd have to, gain 2 points across the nation, and that would probably result in a victory. But to see him losing 11 points, not gaining 2 points like he needs to do to win, but losing 11 points, that net between what this poll says and what he needs to win the nation, again, he needs a 10-point margin in Iowa to win the presidency. He's down by 3. That's a 13-point deficit. For this, for Donald Trump to win the presidency, the bare minimum to win the presidency, this poll would have to be off 13 points. When in the presidential race, the most it's ever been off is 2 points. It's not happening. This will be a blowout election for Kamala Harris. So with that being said, every safe Democratic state, which is a 15% margin or higher for each respective candidate, for every safe Democratic state, that is, they're all staying with Kamala Harris by a safe margin. She's not losing ground in a single one of them. California, Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, Illinois, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, D.C., Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Vermont, and Maine's 1st Congressional District, they are all safe. On top of that, for the first time in how long, I don't even know, you'd have to go back so far, the state of Colorado will become a safe state. This is a rapidly trending left state, and Colorado voted for Biden by 13.5. I think that with the gains Harris is making, as we're going to get to, among women in particular, as well as among seniors, that applies to all the states across the country. And a state like Colorado, of course, is included in that. Colorado, I think, does become a safe state. On top of that, And here is where you really start to see how much of a blowout I think this election will be. Virginia becomes safe after after just 4 years ago voting for Hillary Clinton, the Democratic candidate, by only 5.3%. The Democratic Party comes back in Virginia and now wins it by over 15 points. Again, Hillary won it by 5.3. Just 4 years later, Biden would win it by 10.1. After this Ansauser poll, again, let's just take a look at. I'll get to it, right now, early in the video because it applies to so many states. Women. I think that women are going to break so heavily for Harris in this election, and not only that, they are going to turn out in record numbers. That formula, as this count says here, that is going to win Harris the election. Women are going to win Harris the election. As long as the male vote stays relatively reasonable. But yes, of course, Donald Trump is going to win it. And women are going to break so heavily for Kamala Harris, and they're going to turn out in such record numbers that she will, as you'll see, win the election by quite a lot. And you can already see in early voting, they are already extremely enthusiastic to turn out and vote. Women are turning out more than men in early voting across each of the battleground states in Pennsylvania and Georgia by 12 whole percentage points. That's insane. And when you know how much they're going to break for Harris, it shows that, because of the overturning of Roe, they are going to turn out in record numbers. So a state like Virginia, those white college educated suburban voters that Kamala Harris has been able to perform so well among around Washington D.C. and the suburbs around D.C. of a state like Virginia and numerous states like Virginia, similar to Virginia's electorate, they are going to become safe. These white working class states, those are the ones that are going to become safe states. New Hampshire's a bit iffy because, it just, whatever, this Seltzer poll just contradicts everything else we have seen. And honestly, I'm going to remain relatively reasonable. I could be a lot more unreasonable in my prediction. I really can. I could take this to an extreme, but I really won't because if this poll is wrong, um, then the prediction is all off. But still, remember that deficit of 13 points. This poll would need to be off 13 points in order for Trump to win the election. There's simply just not a path to victory. Now we'll move on to safe Republican states. And when you compare it to 2020, you'll notice that there are not many compared to how many he won by in 2020, where he lost. Remember, he lost in 2020, and he is losing ground from there. Harrison Walls already at 204 electoral votes. So as for Trump advance, they have Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, not Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, um, let's see, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia. I guess I'll give them Nebraska at large, and of course Nebraska's third district, Alabama, and that's it. That is it for the safe states for the Republican Party, and look at that margin. Harris and Walz, after safe states, are at 204 electoral votes. Trump and Vance are at just 75. Not a good sign for the Republican campaign. We'll now move on to likely states. And yes, a lot of the likely states are going, a lot of these once safe states are going by likely margin for Trump and Vance. But that reduction of margin, even in red states, should be extremely concerning for their campaign. But as for Harris and Walz, they also have quite a lot of likely states. At least two of them will shock you. So first of all, the expected ones. New Mexico, obviously, New Hampshire, Maine, and Minnesota. And I will caution you by saying all of these states are like 13, 14 point margins, right near 15, making it a safe state. They're right there, but I just don't think that they're quite there. I mean, just keep in mind here, the top pollster in the nation says Iowa is shifting 11 points towards the left, towards the Democratic Party from 2020. Based off that map alone, all these states would be safe. New Mexico, Minnesota, they'd be well within 20 plus point margins. So please keep in mind that I'm being extremely reasonable here, and don't be surprised if it is more than a blowout than even I am saying. And I am probably the person, the predictor, who is being the most friendly for Harris. And then Nebraska's second district is also almost safe. I think that Nebraska's second district, it will be It's not exactly a state, but any place that has electoral votes, I think that Nebraska second, will really shift towards the left. More really than most other places. This, suburban, right, college educated, white. Those are the voters that Harris will win, who Biden may not have been able to capture in 2020. Now, Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, the Democratic ticket, have two more likely states, and this will shock you. You've heard so much about, these seven battleground states, right? These are the seven battlegrounds that will decide the election. Every other day, you see a poll where Harris is ahead by one or Trump is ahead by one. I mean, just take a look at Michigan. Harris is ahead by point 0.8. I mean, she has led the entire race, but except from the very beginning. But you could take a look like Pennsylvania. It has gone back and forth. And, the polling indicates that it is just about a 50-50 race. Now, in both of these states, Michigan and Pennsylvania, I think that Kamala Harris will win both by over 5%. Likely margin states are 5 to 15% margins. I think that both of them go to Harris by a likely margin. For Michigan, you mostly got to look at the 2020 margin. Biden won by 2.8. To make it a likely state, Harris would only have to gain 2.2% to get it to 5% to make it a likely state. 2.2 is not a lot. And you have to keep the one single poll that we know is at least, and being friendly to Trump, it is definitely at least within a 5% margin. The Anselzer poll. It's guaranteed to be within 5%. That we know. So even if you're very friendly to Trump and you say he's being underestimated by 5 points and he is, in fact, winning the poll by 2 percentage points, that is still a 6-point reduction from 2020. That would still mean he is losing 6 points across the other Rust Belt states. Iowa, extremely similar politically to these other Rust Belt states. How Iowa goes indicates how Wisconsin goes, how Michigan goes, how Pennsylvania goes, how Ohio goes. I mean, you could just see it in the trend map from 2016 to 2020. All of these states shifted just about the same amount. I'm sorry, whoops, wrong map. I meant 2012 to, nope, sorry, yeah, 2012 to 2016. They shifted extremely similar margins towards Donald Trump from 2012, from Mitt Romney in 2012 to Donald Trump in 2016. Iowa was the most, 15 points, but it clearly indicated how the rest of the Rust Belt would go. How the rest of the Rust Belt, Donald Trump would see massive gains from 2012. Well, the same can't be said about how Texas would shift, how Arizona would shift, how Georgia would shift, because they're not the same politically. All the Rust Belt states shifted, the same direction, besides Illinois, but that's barely, demographically and environmentally, well, not geographically, but whatever. Besides Illinois, they all shifted about the same amount. The direction of one state indicated how the rest would go. So this shock poll from Iowa, the +3 poll in Iowa, it clearly indicates an 11-point shift towards the left. It clearly indicates how these other Rust Belt states will go. I'm pretty confident in both of these calls. Again, all Harris would have to do is gain what? 2.2 in Michigan and about 4 points in Pennsylvania. That's absolutely doable. Zooming in on Pennsylvania, I talk about this all the time. It's the shift in the Pennsylvania suburbs, right? From 2016 to 2020, we can look here. Let's actually reverse the years. The part of the state in Pennsylvania that shifted the most towards the Democratic Party, while the state as a whole only became about 2 points more Democratic from 2016 to 2020, look at the suburbs around Philadelphia. Chester County became 8 points when you round, more Democratic. Delaware became 4 points. Montgomery became 5 points. Bucks County became 4 points. And it's not just 2016 to 2020. This is a clear trend from even, before the Trump era, from 2012, so that you could see how, friendly these suburbs were to normal Republican candidates. Suburbs used to be Republican territory until Donald Trump came in. From 2012 to 2020, the suburbs around Philadelphia became dramatically more Democratic. Just look at Chester County. The Democratic Party from 2012 to 2020 gained 17 percentage points in Chester County. Kamala Harris is certain to continue this trend, and it may be more than even this 2016 to 2020 shift. I could see her, making Montgomery another 5 points more Democratic, Bucks County another 4 or 5 points more Democratic. And as long as the rural regions, the rural counties don't do anything crazy, Harris is sure to win in Michigan and Pennsylvania, and I think it'll be by substantial margins. Now, yes, you're hearing that right. We just characterized Michigan and Pennsylvania before we characterized Indiana and Mississippi and Missouri and Kansas. But we'll get to all these states right now. You all know they're coming. They're not going to get close. They're not going to get any more close than likely margin victories across these red states. Montana, Kansas, Nebraska's first. Missouri, Indiana, Mississippi, and South Carolina are all going to be likely states at the end of the day. However, there isn't anything more from there. This is it for the Republican Party's likely states. They're only at 122 electoral votes. The Democratic ticket is doubling that at 260. Now, moving on to lean states. These are 1 to 5% margins. And we'll start, of course, with the Democratic ticket. They are the incumbent party. And you'll see right here, they win the election. Not even going into tilt margin territory, they win the presidential election. Michigan is lean. This is, again, you got to look at this poll. This can't be too far off. It can't be more than 5 points off. And even if it is, let's say Trump is being underestimated by 5, as I was saying before, he's still reducing 6 points from 2020. 6 points. If that actually played out, if Trump is losing 6 points in Iowa, he's going to lose at least 5, or I'd think more, but at least 5 in Wisconsin. And so you could see how I'm, being friendly towards him. I could be much more bullish on Harris's chances. I could be much more unfriendly to Trump's chances, but I'm not. I'm really not because whatever, I don't know. I do want to keep this in, reasonable territory in case this something went horribly, horribly wrong in this poll, which I highly doubt. She's already at 270. Kamala Harris is elected president of the United States. Nevada. This one isn't likely, and my initial thought was that it would be likely, as well as Arizona. We can characterize those as well. These were both Biden states in 2020. Arizona by 0.3, but especially Nevada, could be likely because that was Biden plus 2.4. So, especially in Nevada, with a very relatively small trend towards the left compared to these other Rust Belt states, Harris could win the election. However, the early voting looks very poor for Democrats in Nevada, and they're down by 5, as well as Arizona. They are down by a staggering 9 points. So it is clear from what we see in this Iowa poll, as well as Democrats performing very well in early voting across the Rust Belt specifically, Kamala Harris is doing a great job sealing the Rust Belt for her, while she still has some resemblance of error of not error, but she has some semblance of a loss across the Sun Belt states. There is some chance that she loses these Rust Belt states. When you look at early voting, it's clear that this +3 poll in Iowa, this strong appeal that she has in the white Rust Belt region is not being directly translated in the Sun Belt. Again, it's because the early voting simply looks so good for Democrats in the Rust Belt and bad for Democrats across the Sun Belt. Now, do I think, we'll get to all of it. Do I think that it'll be enough for Kamala Harris to lose the Sun Belt? Absolutely not after a poll like this. This isn't, strictly useful for looking at the Rust Belt. This is also helpful for looking in, across the nation. Of course, it tells us about other regions as well. So Nevada and Arizona, I'm giving to Kamala Harris. I'm pretty confident in those. And again, it's going to be the suburbs that win the election. Of course, Arizona, you got that key Maricopa County. I just don't see her losing it. I don't see Trump. There's so many women who are just not going to. There will be zero gains among women, right? Among Trump. And as long as the men remain relatively stagnant, they can go to Trump, but as long as it's not too much of a blowout, which I don't think it will be, Harris wins the election. It's just simple. Moving on, Harris has more Harris has Georgia, she has North Carolina, and she wins all seven quote unquote battleground states. 16 electoral votes in each. That's huge. She's at 319. So in 2020, Joe Biden won the state of Georgia, but he lost the state of North Carolina. North Carolina voted for Trump by 1.3. And again, all the same reasons apply to a state like Georgia. You have got rapidly trending left suburbs around Atlanta, and the early voting is actually looking good for Democrats here. They're down. They are down by 3 points, but Democrats really rarely ever do well. Rarely ever do really well, I should say, in Georgia early voting because you've got droves of African American voters who, find somewhat of a tradition in voting on election day. Droves of them in the Atlanta metro area, whoops, wrong tab, vote on election day. So being down only 3 points, really not too bad for Democrats at all. Atlanta will carry them over the finish line on election day. When it comes to North Carolina, they have very similar forecasts. I'm sorry, very similar margins when you look at my forecast. But in North Carolina, um, North Carolina voted 1.5% to the left. I'm sorry, to the right, more Republican than Georgia in 2020. So to see them have such similar margins in 2024, that might be surprising to some. But in North Carolina, you got to remember some things. It's rapidly trending left, more so, even more so than Georgia, which is itself. And Democrats have put, so much time and energy and resources into North Carolina. I mean, they have made this a nationalized race. This is now, a state that the whole country is watching to see how they go, which was not the case, a couple elections ago. It simply wasn't, 2012 and 2016. It really just wasn't. So, Democrats are making strong gains in North Carolina, and you can even see population boost in North Carolina for Democrats. In the 2020 map, they had 15 electoral votes. In 2024, after the 2020 census, they now have 16. All of that, more people moving to the suburbs, more people moving to the urban areas, cities are growing. That all translates to a growing Democratic population. Now we will move on to Donald Trump's lean states. So, number one, Maine 2nd District. This is a reduction from 2020, where he won it by 7.4. I think he wins it by about 3 to 4% this time. But he has this weird appeal in Maine 2nd District. You see, Obama won it by 8 points in 2012. Just 4 years later, they voted for Trump by 10. That 18-point shift towards the right was something that nobody expected. Hillary Clinton was expected to win here. And it was one of the most Republican trending districts across the country. That was a huge shock. And I just don't feel like, I should preface that with saying Donald Trump really has a strong appeal here, right? Rural, white, working class voters. I don't think that Kamala Harris can really do much with these independent minded, these more libertarian, independent minded, but right leaning Trump voters in Maine 2nd District. That one I think Trump has. But of course, like everywhere else, the margin is reduced. Now, this might shock you, might not. Alaska. Alaska, I think, is reduced. Or I'd put it as likely, honestly, because that is a bit of a stretch. Trump did win it by 10 points in 2020. That would require a 6-point shift towards the left. And again, right, a Seltzer poll, that translates heavily into what the Midwest and the Rust Belt will look like. Not so much all the way in Alaska. But, of course, it's the closest Democrats come to winning Alaska since when? I mean, 2008 was still 14 points. I might not even be able to see it on this map. Well, 1964. Yeah, 1964 was the last time Democrats won there. But it would be the closest since 1968. So, anyway, that would be insane if it was lean. But, again, 5-point margin, that is completely reasonable when you've got Iowa shifting 11 points. So that leaves us with believe it or not, these are our 4 core toss up states: Iowa, Ohio, Texas, and Florida. How this election has changed in in a matter of hours is beyond me. This one single poll has changed everything. These are the 4 critical battleground states, and they make up a total of 93 electoral votes. Republicans would have to win all 4 to win the election. That is just a fact. They need 4, and now all 4 are pure toss-up states. So this is very tough. These 4 states, I'm very confident in all my other calls. For the record, maybe not by margins, but I'm extremely confident Harris will take all 7 battleground states. It's almost a fact in my mind. But these polls, I don't know. because you've got Iowa, and as I said, of course, this poll, Ann Selzer's poll, says that Harris is up 3, but personally, I don't think she wins Iowa. I just cannot comprehend her taking Iowa. I don't think it's in the realm of possibility, despite me having so much faith in Ann Selzer as a pollster. She is my favorite pollster in the country. I've said that for like a year now. I love Ann Selzer's polling company, but I don't think Kamala Harris can possibly take the state of Iowa. Every other thing, yes, it other data points like what I brought up here indicates that it could be somewhat of a blowout in the swing states. I don't think it's enough to make Iowa 11 points more Republican. It just doesn't make sense for there to be that many swing voters, swinging voters, I should say, in such partisan times. Iowa, I think Trump wins by a point. So that, of course, brings us almost next door to Ohio, because in 2020, Ohio voted for Trump by 8, Iowa by 8.2. They're almost identical politically in terms of how they vote. So, yes, I think that Ohio will be a sleeper and that it will reduce to a very, very, very narrow margin. But in the end, Trump will take Ohio. I think that it is in the realm of possibility that Ohio does trend a bit more towards the Democratic Party than Iowa does, based off of this poll. But again, we don't have polling in Ohio to indicate anything near that. Well, we kind of do. We had a +3 for Trump poll, but still, nothing really even near a Harris victory in Ohio. Ohio, I also think Trump will carry by about 1 percentage point. So that leaves us with 7 critical electoral votes in Texas and Florida. I did not expect to end my election prediction with the 2 closest states in 2024 being Texas and Florida. Now, these are very different because Texas is a state that is rapidly trending towards the Democratic Party. We can just see here from 2016 to 2020, Texas became 3.4% more Democratic. A better example is actually looking from 2012 to 2020. From 2012 to 2020, Texas became 10 points more Democratic. But on the flip side, Florida is becoming more Republican. From 2012 to 2020, Florida became 4 points more Republican, in fact. So that is extremely interesting because they're, similar margins in 2020, don't get me wrong. Let's see, 5.6 and 3.4 in Texas and Florida, respectively, but they're going opposite directions. So the question becomes, can, Kamala Harris make enough gains in both of these states to offset, in Texas, the higher margin that Trump won it by in 2020? Or on the flip side, can the gains Harris is making, can that offset the general trend of Florida voters becoming more Republican? And what Ann Selzer revealed in her poll was that what really won Kamala Harris this poll was senior voters, older voters, trending towards Kamala Harris in numbers we haven't seen since the, pre-Trump era. Throughout this race, we have never seen it. So that was a major factor in Selzer's Iowa poll. And what do you know? In Florida, you've got tons of senior citizens. Obviously, that's just a common known fact. And in Texas, of course, you've got the trending left suburbs. But again, this poll isn't a direct translation to how Texas and Florida will vote. I'm going on the safe side. I don't think that Kamala Harris has what it takes to flip either of these states. I think that both of them will be about 1% margins for Donald Trump. So in the end, Kamala Harris blows Donald Trump out of the water, 319 electoral votes. She wins all 7 battleground states, and she beats Trump by 100 electoral votes. The Republican ticket wins just 219. It's barely even a close race when you look at the margins. Michigan and Pennsylvania are likely. Wisconsin, Nevada, North Carolina, and Georgia and Arizona are all on the verge of being likely. And here are the numbers. Now, don't look at here. I didn't have time yet to update all of the safe states. And many of the likely states, but look at these battleground states. These are the margins I am currently projecting. And look at these lean Republican states. I mean, just a slight error in my forecast, and Harris could end up with Texas, Florida, Ohio, and Iowa, and she wins over 400 electoral votes. Can you imagine if that happened. But right now, this is what I'm going with as my final prediction. I can't believe it. I'm honestly at a loss for words. Well, I mean, I just talked for like half an hour about it, so I guess I'm not. But this is a whole new race. This is a completely different race than it was yesterday morning. And I'm having trouble processing that this is my prediction. But based off of everything that we have, this is my final prediction. So honestly, I'm sorry if you watched all my other videos, my previous predictions, but all of it is kind of useless now because this race is completely different. We have new information that we had no idea about before. But it's not a close race. It's not a close race. Kamala Harris will win the presidency. I am probably 90% certain of that. So, thank you all for watching my final election prediction. This is 4 years in the making. I've been making videos about the 2024 race for 4 years now. We've come a long way. We're now at 16,000 subscribers. Thank you all so much for that. And thank you all for watching this video. Subscribe down below if you haven't already. Comment your final predictions and your thoughts on mine. Drop a like to help in the algorithm. And I will see you all later today.